Good afternoon, and my name's Nik Gowing. I'm a trustee of the Royal United Services Institute. I've been on the advisory council for 10 years. I'm also a visiting professor in war studies at King's College and also at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. And I'm also formerly with the BBC. I'm standing down here because actually we want to make a statement. This is not just about a panel talking to you. This is about you being engaged for the next hour and a half. The rubber really hits the road at this point because you've heard enough about the challenges and the problems. Now it's about how you are going to handle them. Do you have all the right skills in command? How do you develop the skills, given the enormity of change, and in many ways you haven't seen anything yet, rather than just think that you can muddle through and react. It's about how much you can get ahead of the game. In fact, this is about command. It's about the human dimension. There it is. It's about you, and it's about your successes, and about how you're going to adapt to this. We've got 3 speakers. We've also got 3 cadets as well. And I'm down here because I want to feel that I'm a bridge between you here with your ideas and those up here on the panel. And the panel isn't going to come up immediately. They're going to come up one by one. I want you to feel that you can actually have a conversation right from the beginning. Why am I standing here? Well, one of the other things I've been doing is doing a big project about the unthinkables in this world. And that's what we've been hearing about from so many of the speakers. And the one thing that comes through talking to the most senior people is this: the conformity which gets you to the top in many ways disqualifies you from understanding the enormity of change that's underway and therefore what has to be done. Now, I'm standing here not having fought a battle to stand here, but because CGS wrote me a letter on the 22nd of May saying specifically, my challenge, your challenge as chairman or moderator, is to link all of this together before the drinks at 6 o'clock. Some innovative chairmanship, so I'm innovating. A slightly novel approach to the design of the session as it may lend itself to being more interactive. So that's the orders, and it's written in green ink as well. So those are my orders for today, for you. But it is about the human dimension. And let me just, in case some of you weren't here earlier, just underscore some of the things that you've been listening to and why this is so important on the human dimension and why we've got 3 cadets from Sandhurst who are going to be joining the panel as well. It is about what Hugh Strawn talked about, the fixation with the status quo, the need, as CGS said right at the beginning, for a new broad range of capabilities because the challenges are profound and in many ways you haven't seen anything yet. We heard on the last panel, and you're going to hear it tomorrow as well, about artificial intelligence, about algorithms, how the banking industry is changing. We're going to hear from Richard Susskind about what's happening in the legal profession as well. Profound things are happening. And you in the military, you in the army, are not alone in this. The corporates are struggling with all of this too. Jobs are going. Many people find that they're not appropriately equipped with skills or abilities for the scale of change that's underway. So it's about working out how much of what you face is actually part of a massive process. And I would put to you, it's not about 20 years, it's probably about 20 months or even 20 weeks. It's moving that fast in ways which are really deeply uncomfortable. And it is, I think, about culture, mindset, and behavior. And remember, none of that costs money to change. It's about how your human behavior changes. And that's why having the cadets here is so important. We're going to hear from Harlan Ullman right at the beginning about the brains-based approach, about how this can be tackled in many ways. Now, let me reinforce what CGS said right at the beginning, because I need to say this to you even before drinks. It's about being extrovert, not being introvert. You can hide anonymously behind Slido, but it would be great if some of you could actually raise a hand and say, I'd like to speak. Because this is about a conversation. It is about understanding and brainstorming, because among some of you, there may be new ideas, not wacky ideas, but great ideas, which will take everyone to the cutting edge. So Harlan is going to speak for up to 12 minutes at the beginning. Then I'll come to any of you for your reaction. Then Fiona Almond will speak third, and before that, Richard Susskind, who is very much involved in the legal profession, which is going through profound changes at this moment. Then we will hear as well from the cadets too. So those are the orders. Those are the marching orders, and that's what we want to try and do in the next hour and 20 minutes. And the cadets, I should tell you, their backgrounds are fascinating. One of them tried to create a chocolate factory. One of them broke in racehorses in Argentina, and another one created a company at the age of 18, and they've chosen to come in for officer training. So that's the kind of background of the people we'll be hearing from later. My last thought to you at the moment is, before Harlan speaks, is this: how brave are you prepared to be in this environment? Whether it be here in Church House or behind even more closed doors. It's about being bold, it's about challenging that conformity, which you've probably got inside you as well, realizing the enormity of what's got to happen, and then talking about it and exchanging ideas, having a rich discussion, whether it's here or anywhere else. And you've really got to, I'd like to feel that you can bombard us with ideas. I will finish at 5:45, but we could probably go on until 8 and you'll miss the drinks. So let's have plenty of ideas, please, in the next hour and 20 minutes. So that's why I'm standing here as the bridge between you and the panelists, but also the bridge between each other, to try and make sure we have a stream of conversation. There are 2 mics here, and you will not be forgotten about up in the gallery as well. You're also able to contribute. So, Harlan Ullman, please, the floor is yours on the brains-based approach to this massive challenge which CGS has put before us in this, the first day, but also for tomorrow as well.
If you don't mind, I'm going to walk around so I don't put myself to sleep. I have one message. It comes from the book of John Paul Jones. Men, and by extension women, are more important than guns in the raiding of a ship. Let me say that again to an Army audience. Men, and by extension women, are more important than guns in the raiding of a ship. For us to be able to take care of our most important commodity, our most important asset, people, I think we need to move to a brains-based approach to strategic thinking, and I will elaborate that. But if we are going to achieve what General Sir Nik wants in terms of integrated action and what General Milley calls studied insubordination, we have to have a proper framework. Before I get to the framework, I want to take you on about a 30-second jaunt through history. If you were sailing with John Paul Jones and the Bahan Richard, if you were sailing with Nelson in Trafalgar and Victory, if you were with Wellington in the Spanish Peninsula War or at Waterloo, if you climbed up to the mizzenmast of the topgallants, you probably could see for 5 or 6 miles if the weather were good and it was at night. You would be getting your information at sea from tracking down merchant ships to ask where the hell was the French and Spanish fleet. Similarly at Waterloo, your situation awareness was very limited. Now fast forward through history, through World War I, World War II. The only hot war that I served in was Vietnam. We fought Vietnam with weapons from World War I and World War II. 50 caliber machine guns, hand grenades, small arms. And the only thing, and for any cadets in West Point you might be interested, that I learned of professional value after 4 years at the Naval Academy was learning to fire on the uproll, because I had in the back of my patrol boat an 81 millimeter mortar, which came in exceedingly handy when we were helping the Marines and the Army. How are wars fought today? This, an iPad. Soldiers, Marines can dial in airstrikes. They can go to Google Earth. They probably could even order a pizza from some sort on this. That's how much the world has changed. An F-35 pilot's helmet, which costs $500,000, will provide more information to that pilot than has existed in history. So how do we deal with these profound multidimensional changes? I think that a brains-based approach to strategic thinking is essential. It consists of 3 parts. The first is to understand we are dealing in the 21st century and not the 20th century, and I'll come back to that in a second. The second part is that everything has to be based on a fully comprehensive knowledge and understanding of conditions. We don't do that very well. And third, the focus must be to affect, influence, and control the will and perception of friends, of adversaries, of audiences. About the first proposition, this being the 20th century, we were spoiled throughout most of the 20th century in that it was a binary, or to use a phrase from psychoanalysis, bipolar century. It was the West versus the East. It was the Allied powers versus the Central Powers in World War I, the Allies versus the Axis in World War II, and NATO versus the Warsaw Pact. That world is gone. We have multi-variegated threats. The Westphalian system of state-centric dominated politics is gone. Individuals, non-state actors have become hugely empowered. And on top of that, concepts we had in the 20th century, such as defense, deterrence, and containment, no longer are valid. We talk about being able to contain the Soviet Union by the threat of annihilation. How do you deter the Russians from active measures? How do you deter the Chinese, for example, from militarizing those tiny islets in the China Seas? And how do you deal with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State? And if you think we cannot deter suicidal behavior, we did exactly that in Japan in August 1945. This is a different century. Second, knowledge and understanding. Before September 11th, few people knew the difference between Sunnis and Shia. When I went to Vietnam, we were colossally uninformed. A book I have just finished, which comes out this fall, called Anatomy of Failure: Why America Loses Wars It Starts, argues that the failures are due to absence of strategic judgment and absence of understanding and knowledge. And it's true in every case, not just for the Americans, by the way. Now, how do we take this framework, the third part being, of course, influencing, controlling, and affecting will and perception? How do we advance this to further the goals of CGS? First, I would argue in all of the strategic, operational, and tactical planning that you will be doing, you have to employ this particular framework, and you must challenge all your assumptions ruthlessly. Second, as you employ integrated action, you need to have this same model. And third, I have been calling for a long time for a revolution in military education, and it's much more than that. Now, you will know I have argued before to have a kind of a Bletchley Park approach to using non-classified open source material. I have argued for a companycommander.com kind of Wikipedia to interconnect all levels from private to field marshal so that we can share all this information. And I have called for other measures along the lines. But let me even be more specific. Certainly in the US military, you get medals for marksmanship. I get a medal for being a good pistol shot and a good rifle shot. Why don't we do the same thing for information? Maybe not award medals, but you all take physical exams. You all have to pass certain physical qualification tests. I think one of the things that have to be implemented is that there are going to be examinations and grading on how well people can accommodate to this 21st century era in which knowledge and understanding are crucial. And if you can give away some gongs for all of this, so much the better. But you have to understand that this world is profoundly different, and from private to field marshal, we need to be sure that that is implemented. Let me conclude with this notion. If we rely on force alone, and in some cases force is going to be very, very necessary, it is virtually never sufficient. This calls for more than a whole of government response, a comprehensive response. Force is but one element, and the more that we can train, teach, and educate people in the forces about this comprehensive approach in which information, which becomes turned into knowledge and is actionable, becomes one of the center pillars. If we can't do that, if we rely on the past without moving to the future, what happened in Vietnam, what happened in Iraq, what's happened in Syria, and what could happen in Afghanistan will repeat. And we cannot let that happen. Thank you very much.
Consider Black & Decker, one of the world's leading manufacturers of power tools. Apparently when they recruit their new executives, they take them off on a course, sit them in a room, I think nothing like this, but put up a slide precisely like the slide before you, and say to the new executives, this is what we sell, isn't it? And the new executives look rather surprised by this. They say, of course that's what we sell. We're Black & Decker. We're the world's leading manufacturers of power tools. The trainers with some satisfaction say that's not actually what we sell, because that's not really what our customers want. This is what our customers want. And it's your job as new executives to find ever more creative, imaginative, competitive ways of giving our customers what they want. I think there's a great lesson here for every professional in the room. Because when we think of the future, we tend in our generation to be of power drill mentality. What do we do today? How can we make it a bit quicker, cheaper, or better? Not often enough do we take the step back and ask, what's the hole in the wall? What's the fundamental value we bring? Why is it that we exist in the first place? And this is the question I've been asking of the legal profession, and more recently, as I'll explain, of other professions too, throughout my career. I'm interested in the impact of technology on the way that professionals work. And I think a fundamental distinction has to be drawn between automation and innovation. Automation is what many of you will think of when you think of technology. You take some kind of task or process or activity, you computerize it, you streamline it, you optimize it. But you don't fundamentally change it. Innovation, in my terms, is quite different. Where we can look around the world and see all sorts of examples of successful automation, innovation is rarer. Innovation, in my terms at least, is when you use technology to allow you to do things that previously weren't possible. That's where technology becomes very interesting. Consider the cash dispenser, one of the most successful information technologies of the last 50 years. Now, if you have an automation mindset, that's to say, if you think the only thing technology does is simply computerize some pre-existing inefficient manual process, I ask you this: what inefficient pre-existing manual process did that system automate? Was it the case that 30 years ago in the middle of the night when we needed money, we went down to the local bank and there was a physical hole in the wall and we bent down and said, £50 please, and out came a hand clutching fivers? Was it the case that that process existed and some bankers got round the table and said, come on chaps, this is rather inefficient and often quite chilly, why don't we do it differently? Of course not. It was the information technology gave rise to a fundamentally new way of delivering the domestic banking service. So too in your world, so too in my world. Our challenge is not simply to automate what we already do, and frankly I suspect already do very well indeed. The challenge is to employ technology to innovate, to allow us to do things that previously weren't possible. And the fundamental observation here, we can talk about AI and machine learning and so forth, but the proposition I put to you, and it seems to me undeniable, is that our machines are becoming increasingly capable. Almost on a daily basis, they're taking on tasks, cognitive tasks, psychomotor manual tasks, even emotional tasks, that hitherto we thought were the exclusive preserve of human beings. Our machines are becoming increasingly capable and are doing so at an accelerated rate. With my son Daniel, who's an economist in Oxford, we wrote this book called The Future of the Professions, and we looked at 8 different professions, and we were interested to see about the impact of technology on these. Let me give you a couple of examples. In Harvard, in 1 year, more people signed up for Harvard's online course than actually had attended the physical university since its foundation. We looked in law. On eBay, one wonders how many disputes there are amongst traders every year. I can answer that question for you. The answer is 60 million. 60 million disputes. How many of them are sorted out in the courtroom and by judges? And lawyers, not any of them. They're sorted out by online dispute resolution. And we looked at medicine. Look at this article recently in Nature, where it's shown that in terms of one of the most difficult and important diagnosis of dermatologists for malignant melanoma, systems are outperforming the finest dermatologists at this. In every profession we looked at, we're seeing systems becoming increasingly capable and either substituting or at least taking on the tasks that we felt required human beings. Even in the clergy, which we looked at, we found an app called Confession, which was granted a digital imprimatur by the Vatican, or no less. There's tools for tracking sin, and there's drop-down menus so you can consider your options for contrition. I see people moving rapidly to their machines. Whatever profession we looked at, and we looked at architecture, audit, tax, consulting, journalism as well, we saw this fundamental change afoot. We saw 2 futures for the professions. And I think it applies to you as well, the profession of arms. We actually had one interview with a senior general in the Military of Defence, we thought we might include the profession of arms within our book, but we realized we were out our depth. But I do think the same principles apply, and I'm really here today to test that out. The two futures we saw for the professions we looked at, one in relation to technology we said is reassuring the familiar, where technology comes along and sustains, supports, enhances the old way of working. The second is not when the technology complements the old ways of working. As economists would say, it substitutes. And we're seeing right across the professions technologies being introduced that replace human beings. And this is a daunting prospect. Most daunting of all, though, is there's no finishing line. No one in Silicon Valley is dusting their hands off saying, job done, let's plateau for a while. No, the commercial imperatives, the technical imperatives are so strong that we're seeing indeed the pace of change accelerating. And this brings me quite naturally to AI. In the 80s, I wrote my doctorate in Oxford in AI and law. And at that time, I developed in fact, the world's first AI system in law. That was the front screen. I show you it today because it's laughable, really, in design. We thought this was state-of-the-art graphics, and at the time it really was. This is a system that answered a very difficult legal question. When can you no longer raise an action because too much time has elapsed? It belongs to the law of limitation. The details are unimportant. I worked with a leading world expert. I mined the jewels from his head and did a huge decision tree of his expertise, more than 2 million paths through it. The system reduced research time from 10 hours to 10 minutes, and it was the first kind in the world. But it was a very specific kind of AI, the first wave of AI, where what we thought was you get a machine to do clever things by essentially mapping the knowledge of human beings, by representing human beings' knowledge as decision trees and flowcharts. We package it, and ladies and gentlemen, this was in the days where floppy disks genuinely were floppy, 2 5.25-inch floppy disks. We packaged the system, we made it available, and it created a little bit of a ripple in the conservative legal profession. Something remarkable, though, happened about 10 years later, and that was when Deep Blue, IBM's machine, beat Garry Kasparov, the world chess champion. Now, in the 80s, when I was doing research in AI, we thought that wouldn't be possible. We thought it wouldn't be possible for this reason. We thought the only way you get a machine to do clever things is by modeling the expertise of human beings. You sit down with human beings, you say, how do you come to that answer? We put it into a computer system. Here was the problem. When you come to a great doctor or a great chess player, they say, I don't know how to come to difficult decisions. There seems to be this realm of tacit knowledge, this ineffable knowledge that underpins expert performance, which led in the 80s to the solution or conclusion with which many people were comfortable, which is that machines are very good at doing the routine work. Even if it's very complex routine, machines are good at that. But actually, when you require judgment or creativity or interpersonal connection, that's where human beings are required. Where you require innovation or genius, that's where human beings are required. What we hadn't banked on, and you must have heard of it in this conference, is the exponential increase in the processing power of machines. By the time Deep Blue beat Kasparov, this machine was processing 330 million moves a second. A great chess player can only juggle about 100 moves in his or her head at one time. Garry Kasparov was not beaten by a machine that was intelligent or innovative or genius. He was beaten by massive amounts of data, remarkable processing power, and very clever algorithms. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what will replace all professionals. Beware what we call the AI fallacy. It's the mistaken assumption that the only way to develop systems that perform tasks at the level of experts or higher is to replicate the thinking processes of human beings. That's 80s thinking. That's thinking that machines will only do what's in the contemplation of their programmers when they design the system. With machine learning now, these machines are frankly off sorting out problems, identifying correlations, patterns, trends that we cannot, as their users, understand. We're in the era of increasingly capable non-thinking machines. They don't have cognitive states. They don't think or aren't conscious, but they're outperforming us, not by copying us, but by using brute processing power, lots of data, and clever algorithms. And that is the second wave of AI. The best example is probably AlphaGo. You may have heard of this as well. DeepMind, a Google company, developed this. Go, a very complex board game, more permutations than there are atoms in the universe. Just a year ago, leading AI specialists were saying it'll be a decade before a computer system can beat a good Go player. You may remember 8 months ago, this system called AlphaGo beat the world Go champion 4 games to 1. But I want you to think about game 2, move 37. You can see it on YouTube, and it's remarkable. The commentators thought it was a mistake, where the machine had moved the piece. Apparently, the world Go champion later described the move as beautiful and said it brought a tear to his eye. No human being had ever thought to place the piece in that way. In human beings, we call it innovative, imaginative, creative. It's just a system, a second-wave system doing its stuff. What does all this mean for jobs? We very strongly believe the 20s is going to be the decade of not of unemployment, of redeployment. In fact, what we're really going to be doing in the 20s is designing the systems that will replace us. We're designing the systems that will replace us. And for that, we need a whole bundle of new people. I'm not sure how many of these are in the military. There's certainly very few of them in the professions, but these are the people who'll be designing the systems to replace us. These are the people who'll be providing the solutions to the problems to which you used to be the only answer. And that's the message I give to professionals all around the world. In terms of one's career and one's strategy, it's very simple for the 20s. You either compete with the machines or you build with the machines. By competing with the machines, you say, well, I hear what everyone's saying, but I actually still think there's stuff that we do that really no machine can ever do. It might be creativity, it might be empathy, whatever it is. I still think, your argument may run, that human beings are still needed in many areas of work. I don't deny that, but I think the human slice of the pie is reducing in size. So the only other option is to build the machines that will replace us. That's where we need to focus our efforts. That's where we need to focus our energy. Both in our economy and our military, it seems to me, we have to have outstanding systems, and we need to have outstanding systems to develop, people to develop these systems. So in summary, ladies and gentlemen, we're living in the era of increasingly capable machines. I'd encourage you, therefore, to think of holes, not drills. I'd encourage you to think of innovation as well as automation. Bear in mind that what we found in the professions, the two futures. One future, the reassuringly familiar computerization of what you already do, and the other, rather scary, where the technologies actually replace many human functions. Bear in mind the two ways of AI. Disabuse yourself of the notion that machines can only do what was in the contemplation of their designers. We're having a new generation of systems that learn from experience and from data and can outperform us and can even, and this is scary, undertake tasks that we don't understand their operations or their lines of reasoning. The decision I think we have to make right across the economy is that we either build these machines or we compete with the machines. I think we need to do both, but we need to invest heavily in building these machines. And remember, above all else, that there's no finishing line. I close with a quotation from a man in Silicon Valley who said the best way to predict the future is to invent it. I like that quotation because you're gathering together over a couple of days and you're hearing lots of people broadcasting at you about what the future will look like. And you're rightly perhaps asking of them about trends and patterns and so forth. But in a sense, that's also the wrong mindset. The collective resource in this room, the intellectual power, the resource you actually have control over, is so considerable that the question is not what does the future look like, it's what future are we going to invent? Thank you.
So good afternoon. Is this mic working? Yes, it is. Brilliant. So we're going to start with an image.
You need a machine?
No, I have a mic, thank you. Does anybody recognize where this image is from? Raise your hand. Yeah, call it out in the middle there. Brief Encounter it is, yes, that's right. So in this scene, we have Laura Jessen, the character here, meeting Alec Harvey in a train station. It's set in 1945, in a time which most of you probably won't remember, but remember a time before mobile phones. This was then. So there was no option here for her to keep in contact with Alec via Facebook or WhatsApp or any number of the things which we have today. In 2006, the BBC World Service radio station produced a short documentary called The Communications Revolution. That was in 2006. So that's 11 years ago now. And they used this as an example of proving just how far communications had come. So we have a selection there of some of the social media that was available, or fledgling social media that was available at the time. But since then, we have had some extinctions of some of the social media. So the world has fundamentally changed. We already acknowledge that, and that has been going on for the past 10 years, and we've been talking about it for a long time. So who really knows about this stuff? Who understands it? I guess I was probably asked to speak today partly due to my age. I guess I'm described by some as a digital native. I've grown up in this environment. And by nature of the system that I'm talking to, in order to be more senior, you have to be older. Let's take Mark Zuckerberg, the head of Facebook, for example. If he was in the British Army today, he could only be a major by nature of his age. So there always has been revolution. That's not new. The new medium of digital is just like the printing press or the invention of radio or television. Prior to all of this, we used to do things face-to-face. I mean, take Whitehall as an example. You would have to move between the ministries to talk to each other. Whereas today, I can get this. Now, this isn't an aerial photograph. This is actually a series of composite images laid over a 3D ground model. It's part of Google Earth. So today, communication is imagery-based, and it's remote. It's data-driven, and it's interactive. Let's think about imagery for a second. Does anybody recognize this? Raise your hand if you've seen it in the news, perhaps. Anybody here speak the language? Anybody here understand what champagne squirrel means? No. Okay, well, apparently it means that you want to rent an apartment. So this imagery was taken from a WhatsApp group and used in a discussion in court to essentially lead to the fining of a couple who had apparently expressed significant positivity about their intent to rent the apartment. And the judge ruled that because they had done this and then not carried it through, the landlord was then entitled to compensation, purely based on this so-called positive champagne squirrel. So let's take Professor Morabian's comment that only 7% of communications is verbal. So everything else must be related somewhere to the image. Marshall McLuhan was talking here when he said that the medium is the message, mainly about film and television. He was talking about the fact that the way that you receive a message has as much importance as the message itself. So I believe that we perhaps may have missed something relating to this when we talk about the new medium of digital. Perhaps we've missed some of the analysis of the effect of digital as a medium and what is possible through digital and what is not. So I'd like to talk for a second about the average family. So who here can tell me any average statistics, any statistical analysis of the population of the UK with any degree of certainty? I see no hands, so I wonder if that's because we actually probably can't. So if we cannot do it for the simplistic things like demography and statistics about the average family, then how can we do it for the more complicated things like for communications? Or how can we even begin to start thinking about doing that for audiences abroad? Now, this is the late statistician Hans Rosling, who produced a fantastic series called Don't Panic. He mainly spoke about wealth distribution globally and about population dynamics. He gave a presentation in 2014 in which he asked the audience what they believed the birth rate to be for Bangladesh. He gave them the fact that in 1972, the population, the average number of babies born per woman was 7. So that was in 1972. So thinking that he asked this question in 2014, would anyone here like to hazard a guess as to what the population birth rate was in 2014? I'll take any examples. At the back here. 1.8. It's not too bad, actually. But when he asked the question to his audience in 2014, and he got them all to do it anonymously, the audience said that the average birth rate was 6. But actually, today, it's not quite as low as 1.8, which is closer to the UK birth rate. In 2014, it was 2.16. So there was a huge discrepancy there between people believing that 6 was the answer and the reality being closer to 2. So we have some huge misconceptions about our understanding, both of our own population and those of abroad. And these misconceptions perhaps manifest themselves in our understanding of digital communications as well. So the statistics from the Office of National Statistics say that 82% of adults in 2016 had accessed the internet in the last day. That's 82%. And that has come up from 35% in 2006, so the same year that that documentary about the communications revolution was written. And 70% of that communications today is done via a mobile device or app. We are social, an analytical company working in cahoots with Hootsuite, has looked at these digital statistics from across the world. 2017 has been a momentous year in terms of digital communications, and now 50% of the world is online. But that obviously is still quite a contrast to our 82% accessing the internet today, of which 89% of households in the UK have access. And if we contrast that to sort of more regional locations, only 50% of those in Africa have access, only 29% of those in Africa have access to online, and only half of those people have access to social media. Now, I would love to spend time today trying to explain every single app and every single website and tool available to you online and how we could exploit it, but we would be here all day. There are literally, we're not talking tens of thousands. They're inventing all the time, all of that innovation. But listing them off, just, you can consider yourself whether you've heard of them. So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and WhatsApp, YouTube, and we get some slightly more obscure, Reddit, 4chan, Imgur, Twitch, Sina Weibo, QQ, vContactor, OK.ru, Pixnet. Have I lost most of you? Okay. And all of these are evolving as well at a rapid rate. So let's look at one example just while we have some time. Am I still good for time? Yes. So this is YouTube. YouTube at the top there in 2005, and YouTube, a screenshot I took over the weekend. They haven't really changed on the surface. They haven't really changed that much. YouTube was invented by 3 guys who worked for PayPal, and 12 years later, YouTube is the second most visited website on the internet, only after Google. Please raise your hand if you recognize this person. Yeah, so there's about a dozen there, if less than that. So this person is a 27-year-old Swedish man who has earned £15 million since 2011, and he is probably the most watched person online. His name is PewDiePie, and for any of you that don't recognize him, he's probably one of the biggest influences for the new generation. But I would argue that any illusion of his work online of it being effortless is just that. It is just an illusion. I would argue that Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000-hour rule now applies to any one of these people working and being successful on these social media websites or apps. We are now seeing that the first true masters of this new medium are coming through. I would suggest that, and this is more of a request for a solution here, I would suggest that our next step is that we need perhaps a digital T.E. Lawrence. Now, this is not a phrase I coined myself. I picked this up along the way, along the circuit, but I believe that we're probably unlikely to hold much of this expertise in defence, so we need to exploit the whole force concept as well. So these individuals will be potentially recruited in when required and cut away when not. And we've already got some good examples of this in JFC and within land. There are also further problems, though, that we must acknowledge about the risks that come from our knowledge of the medium. For example, the biases that come from archiving. So this was the BBC News website on Saturday. But this was also the BBC News website on Saturday. So there are different ways of interacting with the same medium. So if our first reaction is always to Google things, not everything is digital and not everything is archived. And so if it's not retrievable in the original format, then we're going to have problems experiencing that information that I was talking about before. So if the layout is platform dependent, that will change our understanding. And if your archived website is from 1998, then you're also going to need a way to access the way that page would have been viewed in 1998. So you need the hardware as well in order to get the true experience. And just to add some understanding to this, Niels Brugger from Denmark assesses that web page lifespan is about just 2 to 4 months. And of the 10 million websites archived in 2001, 90% of those were gone by 2013. Of course, there are other risks to digital natives from taking risks online with our personal data, the misinformation, and our lack of ability to do verification. And that is perhaps some critical analysis skills that we lack, and I'm grateful there isn't time to open that can of worms now. So the problem, I believe, is twofold. Perhaps an older generation that isn't engaged deep enough to lead this yet, but also that a younger generation is taking it too much on a surface level. Clearly, our adversaries are much more holistic in their grip on this, and so we are at a risk of being outmaneuvered if we don't act now. And so I believe that the solution is straightforward. The strategic level that is going to employ these digital natives must do three things: become better educated themselves. In the 10 years since the communication revolution was first being spoken about, we need to make it easier for the digital natives to communicate, thank you to their leadership. And we need to afford the time and investment in this new talent, including education about understanding the limitations. And finally, the whole force. So manage the risks of this civilian technology and maintain the initiative. I'd just like to read the final conclusion that I have scripted. So, as Laura experienced in Brief Encounter, the medium of those face-to-face meetings was the message. Communication messages today should be reflective of the population. So I believe it is about managing risk and leading some digital natives of whatever part of that force to become that digital T.E. Lawrence, to understand our audiences in depth and use the correct medium best suited to convey our message. Otherwise, at best, we will fail to communicate at all, and at worst, we might communicate the wrong thing entirely. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fiona. So those are some of the thoughts you've already put on the agenda as I introduce the officer cadets. If you'd like to come to the platform. They are going to speak for about 12 minutes. There is Rachel Henwood, who founded her first company at the age of 18, based in Marrakesh, ran the company for 4 years, and also, until she became an officer cadet, was a religious studies teacher. Also, we have Officer Cadet Tom Fortescue. He was the young man who broke racehorses in Argentina, has a degree in civil engineering, has been involved in wealth management, consulting, and sales before joining Sandhurst. And finally, Harry Atkinson Clark, who directed student theatre productions and first tried to establish a chocolate factory, and more recently working for a coffee subscription startup in Brighton. But that's important for you to know because of the reasons they've chosen to become officer cadets. And what we're going to hear, I've already heard the presentation down at Sandhurst, is what their aspirations are for how command and responsibility can change. Over to you.
Thank you. So you may well be wondering now what three of us officer cadets, with a combined experience in the Army of little over a year, are doing on stage here at the Land Warfare Conference. Well, the feeling's mutual. But we are here as the lowest common denominator in the Army to talk about communications at the most basic level. How we communicate and how we like to be communicated with.
The way we communicate has fundamentally changed and will continue to do so as the passing of information becomes even quicker and easier. The Army should acknowledge this information boom by exploiting the efficiency that modern technology can provide, whilst planning against the dangers that it can cause. We understand that the Army is currently using an extremely wide range of platforms to communicate, from traditional forms such as written orders and briefs, to more modern platforms such as MOS, Defence Connect and Jive.
Of course there's a place for these in the Army, particularly seeing as they are regulated and controlled. But what we're going to discuss is the rise of instant messaging applications, easily accessible, fast and convenient communications such as WhatsApp. Whatever the policy, humans are always going to opt for the path of least resistance. When it comes to communications, instant messaging is that path.
So the most popular instant messaging application currently used in and outside of the Army is WhatsApp. For those who are unfamiliar, WhatsApp is a free, civilian instant messaging application that allows you to send messages to either individuals or groups of up to 256 people. It also allows you to share documents and photos instantly.
The three of us are part of 2 WhatsApp groups at Sandhurst, one of which we use to communicate with our chain of command, and one with each other. These statistics are taken from our official group over a 4-month period between February and June 2017.
Firstly, we write an average of 8 words per message. This shows just how concise our messages are to one another and highlights how easy it is to disseminate information rapidly. How long would it take you to send a quick email or memo to 256 people around the world? If it's under 4 seconds, I'd be very surprised.
Secondly, 4,736 messages have been sent in this 4-month period between just 37 members. Considering that we all live within metres of each other, isn't this telling of the high reliance that we place on this form of communication? Why do we value it so highly? Because it's quick, it's in our pockets, we choose exactly who we send it to, and then can even confirm who's read it.
Next, let's focus on the group's busiest day of the week, Sunday, when WhatsApp is used to organise our week ahead and disseminate administration and key timings. No matter what we're doing or where we are that weekend, we are accustomed to checking our WhatsApp group for crucial information on our day of rest.
Finally, this word cloud shows the 25 most used words on the group. Key words relate to timings, places, and duties. As you can see, this is clearly work-related communications, but we're communicating unofficially on a civilian platform. I think you'd all agree that the ability we have to analyse these statistics could have great utility in the way in which we communicate with our army.
However, what happens when things go wrong? As you may have all experienced with emails, when using quick-fire communications, irreversible mistakes can be made. With us, this is most often caused by writing a message to the wrong group and upsetting our chain of command.
It is clear that these communications are heavily used, but they're not official. Our official channel is still written orders on notice boards that the whole company physically goes to read each evening. In a modern, efficient army, is this really the most efficient way of operating? Isn't one person taking a photo of the orders on a communal group or simply disseminating the orders electronically in the first place much more efficient? So long as everybody is aware of what they can and can't share, isn't this a much better way of ensuring that every person receives the orders directly wherever they may be located?
So what do we think? As an organisational tool, instant messaging serves a great purpose, just as effectively when a unit is in the same block as when they are geographically dispersed. It is an incredibly important platform for people of our generation, and therefore should be taken seriously as a legitimate avenue of exploration by the Army. Now, some of the more technologically savvy amongst you may be wondering why Defence Connect doesn't meet these requirements. Defence Connect was an attempt by the military to keep people away from using platforms such as Facebook for organisational use.
A unit can have its own page for posting messages and work-related documents. It can also create a chat through Jive. Some units do use this platform effectively, but it does have its flaws. It is inconvenient to use on a mobile device, notifications are sent and received via emails, and it is clunky. To get a Jive chat set up properly is a nigh on impossible task, and the whole system lacks impact through the way in which information is presented.
Even though Defence Connect and Jive are being used effectively by subunits, most will naturally opt for a faster, more convenient method of communication. The Army then has a choice: invest heavily to further develop its own instant messaging system, or exploit the civilian technology that's already available to us.
We asked all British Army attendees to complete a simple online survey prior to attending this conference. Less than 25% of you did. I see some confused faces. The instructions were published on Part 1 orders and have been there for 2 weeks. Of those 94 attendees that completed this survey, only 30 of you selected that you found the information through Part 1 orders yourself. The rest of you through electronic means of communication. This highlights the lack of reach the current formal orders system has, our over-reliance on computers, and the expectation that information should come direct to us. It tells us that traditional means of communications are outdated, and whilst they provide a necessary foundation, they are inconvenient and lack impact or timeliness.
Whilst instant messaging does help solve some of these issues, it is true that the era of technology has reduced our forward planning. The ability to contact a large group of people within seconds means that planning ahead isn't as necessary these days, and we are, unfortunately, less organised. It is too late to change this, as clearly technology has its grip on our everyday lives. But, whilst it does have its pitfalls, there are huge advantages to be gained. Therefore, we feel that the Army should embrace instant messaging as an opportunity and not a threat. And to poorly paraphrase comments made earlier by Lieutenant General Vollmer, we have to use every technological asset we can get.
Before we go on, we'd like to dispel any preconceptions about our generation that you might have. We're not all totally dependent on computers and believe that where possible, face-to-face communications are best. But we do expect information to come to us. It's the way we've grown up. We've always had the answer at our fingertips, which should fit with military efficiency, the dissemination of information by the fastest and easiest means possible, is important not only to our generation, but to the Army as a whole, and why wouldn't we embrace that? Every day, the Army is recruiting people of our generation and much younger, people who make even us feel old through the way in which they're using technology. This is the reality. This is not the future, it's the present. The youngest person eligible to start their military training today was born on this date. He or she has grown up around computers and would expect a workplace such as the Army to be on par with the civilian world.
So what are the problems? Let's think a little about being on operations. How is such reliance on instant communications going to affect us when we are fighting an enemy with electronic warfare capabilities? There are massive risks. Modern armies are able to send messages to entire villages, track any phone, and degrade morale through the spread of fake news. We should therefore be very careful with what we allow our soldiers to take into the field. This was emphasised through the recent deployment to Estonia, where individuals' phones were hacked and subsequent restrictions were placed on taking personal phones on operations. But used responsibly and securely, and with no limits to its range, could their instant messaging capability prove useful in future operations? And secondly, how is a platoon of soldiers going to interact with each other and work well in the field as a team when they're used to talking to each other on their smartphones? Does excessive dependence on instant messaging degrade social bonds and foster a culture of isolation?
It shouldn't. Instant communications should be used responsibly, and where possible, merely as an organisational tool and a facilitator for face-to-face communications. Security, however, is always going to be a big question. I'm sure many of you have considered it already. Is the civilian technology that we are currently using encrypted enough? Can we hide amongst the noise of civilian traffic, or is a military platform the only option? And then there's formality. Rank and formality are integral parts of our work life. Speaking to superior officers on the same channel that you speak to your mum or partner can potentially endanger boundaries. Many of us, I'm sure, have felt uncomfortable as we've lovingly said goodnight to partners, only to find we've regrettably sent the message to a colleague or superior officer instead.
The questions could go on, but could mostly be solved by refining the way in which we use these communications at work. Before technology runs away from us and starts to cause us trouble, we need to realise that this is the new reality. We need to develop sound doctrine which guides our use of instant communications so that they can be embraced and used effectively and responsibly. We need to take what we've learned from the past, but combine these lessons with this new reality, converging the old and the new to become intelligent users of instant messaging to enable a more connected, responsive, and secure army.
We have mentioned some of them already, but during our discussions, 7 of what we like to call principles of defence communications arose. Principles that we look for in a form of communication, and also which guide our use of it. We combined what we liked from older forms of communication with the modern realities. And don't worry, there isn't an acronym yet. They are human interaction, speed, impact, convenience, formality, security, and conciseness.
Against these 7 principles of defence communication, this is how we rate instant messaging. So as we've mentioned, it is a fast, convenient, and concise method of communication. However, it could fall down in these areas. So firstly, human interaction. The Army's operational effectiveness depends upon close-knit teams and confident outgoing people, qualities which can be degraded through communicating through a screen. Non-verbal messaging also runs the risk of interpretation bias, where the intended meaning of the message becomes distorted.
And formality. Communicating at work needs to be distinct from communications within our personal lives. And therefore, hierarchy and official language need to be observed.
Impact. With instant messaging, there is such a persistent flow of chatter that critical information can often be drowned out. And messages don't persist. It would be crucial then to officially regulate what is sent over an Army instant messenger within the workplace.
And security. Civilian encryption is not perfect, but until the military creates an all-singing, all-dancing instant messaging application that all military personnel can have on their phones, civilian apps are what people are going to naturally use. So long as there are key guidelines and education as to what can be shared and what can't be, the military should be able to hide amongst civilian traffic.
All of these problems could be easily treated if the Army were to accept the prevalence of this type of communications. We need to go back to basics with a joint service publication that covers defence communications as a whole and ensures education at all levels. To round up, we need to embrace the ways in which the Army has always communicated and combine them with what we have available now. To allow for effective communications in this 21st century Army, we need to converge the old with the new. Thank you very much.